Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of our Windows deployment series. Most of what we'll be doing here falls in line with the first section of the Microsoft 365 Endpoint Administrator exam. And the first section that is deploy Windows clients. Well, this syllabus is a bit changed, so we may want to go down and look at the exam guides. And yeah, so skills measured as from September 17th. Uh, the objectives I changed, but we'll be focusing on the skills measured before September 17th. And this deployment series falls in line with the first section of this MD 102 exam, which is deploy Windows client, and it's like 20 to 25% of the exam. And we're going to look at the primary deployment technologies for deploying Windows clients, like using Intune and other related technologies like MDT and WDS. And our objective is to demonstrate how you can implement the various technologies that are available through Microsoft for deploying Windows client devices across organizations. As we say, as you know, there are like modern methods, that will entail us using autopilot, as well as there are like previous methods that entail us using technologies like MDT, that is the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, WTS, that's Windows Deployment Service, which still applies to setting environments where legacy systems are still being used. So we are going to look at all these technologies in this series because the strategies that you will use will depend on the scenario of the organization that you want to deploy Windows devices to. With that much being said, we are gonna dive into setting up our lab environment. There's one article that relates to that. It's called Prepare for Deployment with MDT. So deploy Windows 11 with MDT for, no, that is not it. Prepare for deployment with MDT, Windows 10. And technically, this should walk us through like what we need to set up our environment. And first, we'll have to do a bit of planning. And let me just pull up my Visio. So we're gonna build our infrastructure, and we'll have networks and servers. We're gonna have a domain controller, which is a TC01. We're going to also have an MDT server, which is going to be MDT01, and we're also going to need the Hyper-V host, where we would actually use to build our reference image and use it to test our deployments. And yeah, essentially, we will put both of these on one virtual machine. I'm gonna assume that you have a basic understanding of Hyper-V and probably already have that set up. I have my Hyper-V already set up here, and I have some clients that are already working there. So first thing we want to do is we want to create a new virtual machine, and I will name that MDT server. or rather, I'll call it deployment server. Next, I'm gonna use generation one, and I want to make these 2 GB of RAM. Next, and I'll connect it to my default switch. We'll go over all of that later on. I'll create a series. As part of this series, we'll talk about how to set up Hyper-V. But initially, to get things started, so I have an environment where I can explain those things more detailedly to you. We're gonna first of all focus on setting up the lab environment, and I'll give this 128 GB of virtual disk space. And for the install, we want to install that from the local drive. So I have here various. It's gonna be, we use Windows Server 2016. Next, and then finish. So now our server is ready to be started. We're gonna install our deployment server. Go to start. Go to next, install. And this is gonna take a bit of a while. So while that is, while we're waiting for that, okay. And now we'll choose the standard. The Windows Server 2016 standard evaluation, you could use that, but then that will need you to use mostly the command prompt. And if you want the desktop experience with a GUI, just like a Windows like this, then we're gonna use the standard evaluation desktop experience. I accept. Next, do a custom install. Next. And then we have to let it run. It may take a couple of minutes. Yeah, it's gonna take a while. So while that is running, I'll just give you an overview of the various Windows deployment strategies that we have. So when deploying Windows clients, what is being used by most organizations right now, it's what we call Windows Autopilot. And essentially, it's like a modern deployment solution that will enable you to provision and configure devices, using a cloud-driven approach. That means you need something like a Microsoft Entra subscription where you have your users configured, and most of them. Okay, so we have the Windows Autopilot, which is a modern deployment solution that enables organizations to provision and configure devices for end users using a cloud-driven approach. And we also have manual installation, which is like a traditional method where Windows is installed manually on each device, typically like when you use a USB or a network share program like WTS. And we also have another third strategy is an in-place upgrade, which is essentially a method for upgrading existing Windows installation to a newer version, like wiping the device. I'm gonna create a note document so I explain that to you why we are waiting. Okay, it looks like our server is already getting ready. So deployment strategies. The first strategy is to use Windows Autopilot. And the second strategy is to use manual installation. And the third strategy is what we call in-place upgrades. Okay, and what is essentially different with this method is for Windows Autopilot, it's it will enable you to provision and configure devices using cloud. And for the manual, what I would say about the manual is it will involve manual installation. It will involve a manual installation such as a USB or using the network. And we're going to go through all of that. So with manual, you could use a program like MTD. You could also use another program like WTS, and also we have the ADK. We're going to go through all of that in detail, and for our initial setup, we will have to set up a server. This current server that we're trying to set up is basically going to be our deployment server, and it will run an Active Directory domain service. It will also serve as our DHCP server. It will also have a domain name service running on it. And we would also install WDS on it. And we would have the ADK and also MDT all installed on our deployment server. And it's going to be what we'll be using to test and demonstrate all the various technologies that we have for deploying Windows clients to servers. Okay, so our server is configured. Okay, so which step do we have? We've installed network domain credentials, organizational units. So we're gonna go first and configure our server. We have a server here. I'm gonna use the password. Use any password that is typical, it's easy for you to remember. I'm gonna log in with the password that I created. So in this document for to deploy Windows 10 using MDT, it's gonna walk you through how to prepare for deployment with MDT, and then later on we're gonna create our first reference image to test if our lab environment is properly set up. So now this is our Windows 2016 server. And when we go here, the first thing that we want to do is actually change the name of the server, and we're gonna call this deploy server. Same thing here, deploy server. And restart. Okay, while that is restarting, let's continue back. And the third method I said we have was an in-place upgrade. And an in-place upgrade, it's uh, it's essentially is a method for installing new systems or for or for wiping a device completely. No. So an in-place upgrade actually is uh, is a method for upgrading existing Windows installations to newer versions without wiping the device. So this way, uh, essentially, it's going to maintain the user's data, and it's going to maintain the user data and the configurations. Okay, so let's head back to our server. I think our server is now ready. We've changed the name and we're logging back with our password. Just wait a bit for things to initialize. And we go back to a local server. We now have our new name here, deploy server. The next thing we want to change is make sure the time is correct. Just gonna do that by changing the time zone. And this says Canada Pacific. We're looking for Canada Eastern time right here. Okay, and now our time is correct. And the next thing that we want to make sure is to change the IP. As we can see here, we are not yet connected to the internet. I'm gonna open open up the network, go to network properties and check the IP version 4 properties. First, we also gonna run to see what was automatically assigned as the IP address for this computer, for the server. I'll say IP config, and it defaults to 169.257. Okay, so we're gonna do a little bit of auto assign. So when it is this way, it has to obtain the IP addresses automatically and also obtain the TNS automatically. If it can't do that, we can use the following IP. I'm gonna specify the gateway first. If I can remember, that is 172 23 192.1. And the DNS here, we're gonna use the 8888.1111, and we're gonna assign 172.192.50 as our IP address. And the subnet mask here, this is /20 domain. I will show you how to why I'm doing all of this in subsequent series for our network series. But this is mostly focused on deployment. So I would assume you have a bit of knowledge about all of this, or just follow on and OK and close. So it should ask me, do you want to allow this piece of this other PCs on this network? We're coming out this on your home and work network. I will say yes, because it's a public network, and I do believe the internet should be browsing right now. I'm just gonna open up a browser. Okay, yeah, so we should be connected to the internet right now. Another way for us to check if the internet is connected is to do IP config, uh, to do a ping. We're gonna ping that to the Google server and reply 3 times. You sent 4 packets and received 4 packets, which means we are connected to the internet. And if we check IP config again, we'll see now we have 172.23.197.50 and the subnet max, and that is our default gateway. Okay, we have our network set up. Now we gonna move for, let me see my notes. Yeah, we're gonna install Active Directory. So Active Directory comes with, it's gonna automatically install TNS, and then we're gonna install DHCP, and then we install the assessment and deployment kits, AD key, and then we install WDS, and then install MDT. Well, we have to follow up this order because uh, WDS will require DHCP, and WDS will require ADK, and MDT will require WDS and ADK and DHCP and everything that is right here. So install these technologies following this order. So first, let's install our Active Directory. We'll go to Manage, Add Roles and Features. Next, Role Based. Next, our server is already selected. and we choose Active Directory domain service. So we could install all those services that I mentioned. We could check all of them, but then it's always good to go to test install one role and then check its configuration, configure it, and then check to see if it's working before going up to the next one, so that way you don't get confused if something is not working, so you know exactly where to fix the trouble. Yeah, this is it's a kind of like you have to approach it in a kind of like incremental way. So you make sure you minimize the likelihood of having any errors along the way. Okay, so let's install Active Directory. We're going to say add features. We go to next, leave everything as it is. Next, restart the destination server if required, and then click install. Okay, this is going to run for a while. And while that is running, I would continue with my discussion on the various, just giving you an overview of, deployment, because that is all what we'll be talking in this series. And and as I earlier said, we're gonna start with MDT because it's more of like the most recent. WDS is a bit deprecated, and I think MDT was developed to replace WDS, although we can still use both of them because depending on the organization that you're actually deploying pieces for, they may still have, on-premises systems and they may not have any cloud requirement. So in that case, you still have to use the old technologies to do deployment for them. What if they have like Windows 7 computers? Because most of the modern technologies will only work with Windows 10 and Windows 11. And if they still have like old computers like Windows 7, then you still have to use those old technologies. It takes time for companies to actually, you know, migrate your services to cloud and a lot of planning. And in most cases, you will still meet companies still using those Windows 7 devices, especially in the medical field, because some of those computers that they use for like the lab equipment, once they're installed, there is practically no way for you to upgrade them. And if they have an issue, they will patch them and still maintain the same operating system that those applications were developed on. So you will still meet a couple of those systems that will require the older technology. So it's important that I also go through all of those and I'll show you how they work. Yeah, so this configuring installation succeeded. Yeah, we close it. So the next thing we have to do is to promote our domain. I'm gonna click that. And we're adding a new forest. We're just like creating everything. This is gonna be our primary domain controller, as well as our WDT server. Although we're giving it a lot of work, we could create a scenario where we have multiple servers that do specific role, but for our lab configuration, we're going to use one server for most of those services. And in subsequent series, I will actually show you a much better configuration. So we're gonna call this xlabs.local. And For the functional, this it has to do like with backward compatibility. So if you already have Windows like Windows 2018 servers, you may want to choose this so that if this was to be joined to an already existing domain, then you would have to set this up so you match with the compatibility of those other systems that are already running. But since we're already using Windows 2016, we're just gonna leave everything like that, and then we set our password. Next. Okay, don't worry about this error. What it's been saying, a delegation for this TNS server cannot be created because authorized parent zone cannot be found. So it's gonna create, because of this, it's gonna create a TNS and then configure it to use with Active Directory, because Active Directory requires DNS to operate. So you wouldn't have to create a TNS. So the previous process, it had to check the net BIOS, check the network to see if there's already a domain called xlabs, and since it didn't found it, then it verified the net BIOS name assigned to the domain and then changed it necessarily. So it confirmed that this name we could use it. So we're gonna go to next. And the database will be saved here. The logs files could be found here, and sysfold is right here. We're gonna go to next, next, and it will do a spree check and validate everything. And this is just, it says all prerequisite check passed successfully. So these are just warnings. There are nothing for you to bother about as long as you see that all prerequisite checks, we're good to go. Install, and now it's gonna promote this server to the primary domain controller. Okay, and I think after that it's gonna restart. And while that is restarting, let's go over a little bit of things. And we're talking about an in-place upgrade. So when I was saying about an in-place upgrade, yeah, so I said in-place upgrade is a method for upgrading existing Windows installations to newer versions without wiping the device. And that way it will maintain the user data and configuration. And the benefits of using an in-place upgrade is that it preserves the user's data and configuration, and it definitely will just reduce the need for you to have to do a full install of the operating system and then later on start installing all the devices and reconfiguring the device back to how the users may want to use it. And an example of an in-place upgrade will be maybe upgrading a Windows 7 device to Windows 10. That's what we mean by an in-place upgrades. And also for manual installs, this is, I mean, if you have a small, say a smaller organization, then you may want to use manual installs because then you save costs on IT and you save cost and time on tools. So, and also you could use the manual installation in a scenario where you don't have the automatic tool. Like for example, you require subscriptions, like enterprise subscriptions when you want to use the Windows Autopilot for an organization. And if you yeah, so some of the disadvantage that I will see when you're doing like a manual installation is that it's time consuming. I mean, you would see from the process of us trying to manually install this server, it will probably take us about an hour or so before we complete it. So it's one of the process of manual installation is that it's time consuming and it's also labor intensive. You have to do a lot of manual entries like doing the stuff. But the thing with modern deployment methods is that uh, most of those configurations will be done automatically, and you would come to understand those as we progress. But the objective that I want to do is that I will show you all the deployment technologies that we have, so you'll be in a better position to decide if you're faced with any kind of scenario to know exactly the ones that will work for you, as we just said. So while that is running, we're gonna go back to our setup. So for for a deployment server, I'm just gonna give you the configuration. Uh, we created this. We're using the OS is Win Server 2019, and we're gonna use the RAM for a virtual machine. It's gonna be we used 2 GB, and disk space we used was 128 GB. And remember, we configured it to Gen 1 VM on Hyper-V. Torching that. And if you want to know where to get the source files, let's see. Okay, I think our server is now ready. So I'm gonna dive in and then I log in with my password. properties. So now I have Active Directory domain installed and DNS. Let me make sure our DNS is properly configured. I go to the DNS manager and we'll look at the reverse zone lookup, forward zone. Check the folders if they're properly, and this is the interface, and this is gonna be our DNS server. So when we're setting up client computers on this network, we'll be using this for the DNS. Okay, so that is being set. The next step we have to do is to, let me just download Chrome. I don't like Internet Explorer. I'm gonna upgrade get google.com. Yes, okay. Add, add, close, add, add, close, add, add, close. Okay, there's just a lot of security when you're using Internet Explorer and Windows Server. So you're gonna download Chrome, or I'll use Firefox. Okay, now that Firefox is installed, yes, so what do we have from our list? We're gonna need, okay, the next software that I want to download is gonna be the ADK. We'll look for ADK, Windows ADK for Windows 10. This is the latest version. Uh, the same, most of this will work, but then we're gonna look for that for Windows 10. ADK installer preview, ADK that the Windows 11 and supports earlier versions of Windows 10. I'm looking for the ADK 2004. ADK Windows 11, ADK for Windows Server. Okay, I think this is gonna work for Windows 10. And then I'm gonna download this. Then we'll go to our installation folder, to our download folder, and then I'm gonna run the setup. I leave everything as it is in the default. Yes. Accept. Install. Okay, close, and then we're gonna install the ADK for WinPE. It's essentially the same thing. The only thing is it used to be part of the ADK, but for some reason, I'm not sure, Microsoft removed it from that kit. Maybe due to compatibility and deprecation. Okay, so while that is taking, yeah, we are now installing the ADK. And when you visit this link here, you're gonna find the ADK and install it. And the ADK for Windows 10 and the Windows P add-on for ADK. And there's also an updater here. If you're having any troubles, we could see that, like if you're having any troubles that you're having. And part of the setup is we're gonna create a couple of folders for our setup. But let's keep on installing our system first. So let's wait for that. And then when you go to the Microsoft study guide for MT102, it doesn't really mention MDT, but from my point of view, I think it's necessary that you understand like some of those previous deployment strategies in order for you to get a solid foundation about deployment before heading over to the modding ones, because then uh, most of the concepts build on the features that we had in the previous ones. There's a self-paced study guide here, and we're just gonna go through that while we're waiting for install. Let me copy this over to the server. So I'll be able to monitor this while we browse. So it's not oh, that is Internet Explorer. Okay, let's open up. Just want to put this somewhere that I can monitor it while it's installing, as we're discussing. Okay, so as a candidate for the certification, your subject matter expertise, you have subject matter expertise in deploying, configuring, protecting, managing, and monitoring devices and client applications in the Microsoft 365 environment. You're responsible for managing identity, security access, policies, updates, and apps for endpoints. You're also responsible for implementing solutions for efficient deployment and the management of endpoints on various operating systems, platforms, and device types. You're also responsible for implementing and managing endpoints at scale by using Microsoft Intune, Windows 365, Windows Autopilot, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and Microsoft Entra ID. As an endpoint administrator, you collaborate with architects, Microsoft 365 administrators, security administrators, and other workload administrators to plan and implement modern workplace strategies that meet the business needs of an organization. You have experience with Microsoft Entra ID and Microsoft 365 technologies, including Intune, as well as strong skills and experience in deploying, configuring, and maintaining Windows clients and non-Windows devices. So we are focusing on this series. We're looking mainly focusing on deploying. Okay, WinPE is already done. So our next step that we're gonna head over now is to install. Just wanna open up a notepad. I always like making notes as we're going, and I encourage you to should pick that. So now we're gonna wanna install WS. What do we need to install WS? We first of all need to set up DHCP because WDS requires DHCP, and we've already installed the ADK, the ADK, the Windows Assessment and Deployment Toolkit that we just installed. And yeah, we have everything set up, so we can go now to manage, add another server role, go to next, role based, and we'll search for Windows Deployment Service, add feature, next, no, cancel. So we want to first of all install DHCP. And after DHCP is installed, then we're going to install WDS. While that is running, let's head back to our notes. And there's like a self-training course here. And although I'm not gonna follow up the same line because I try to to study the stuff that uh, prepare you to understand the more complex stuff, because it's always good to have the foundation. And any understanding on its theory is based on your previous understanding of the foundation. So if you have a thorough knowledge of the foundations, then it's easy for you to understand the more complex concepts. And yeah, and these are all the various sections. We have explore endpoint management, execute device enrollment, but most of what you will see here and in the exam will be focused on MDT. It's a pretty short course, but then most of all these things that you want to learn here will you require to understand, have a detailed understanding of the foundations that I'm trying to give you right now for you to move ahead and for you to understand most of the sections. And the first part of this training will be to MDT 102 to explore endpoint management. And you learn things like, you examine modern the benefits of modern management, the enterprise desktop life cycles, and how you examine planning and purchasing. You examine desktop deployments, and you how you plan application deployment and all of those. And also, I think I may have the old syllables for Microsoft somewhere. I'll show you that, which is more in line with what we have to do before September. Okay, so this has the following parts. Explore and point malware is the same thing. You see, deploy using end premises tool. Okay, this should be the objective that we're focusing on right now. Deploy using on-premises based tool. So MDT, WDS are all on-premise based tools. So students are introduced to deployment using Microsoft Deployment Toolkit and Configuration Manager. So this is the section that by the time I'm done with this series, you should have a thorough understanding of this, and you will get an introduction, examine deployment guidelines, readiness tools, assess application compatibility, plan a plot, check your knowledge, deploy using Microsoft Deployment Toolkits. That's the first section. And discuss the shift from tradition to modern management and where an on-premises solutions best fit into today's enterprises. After completing this module, you'll be able to describe the fundamentals of using images in traditional deployment method, describe the key benefits, limitations, and decisions when planning a deployment of Windows using Microsoft Deployment Toolkit as MDT, describe how Configuration Manager builds on MDT and how both can work in harmony. And yeah, the prerequisite, you need to have a strong technical skills in installation, maintaining, troubleshooting, and Windows 10 OS or later. And you also need to have a strong understanding of computer networking, client security, and application concepts. And you also need to have experience using Active Directory domain services. That is the more reason why uh, I'll have to show you how to set up this lab, so you get an overview have to do all those basics, those foundational stuffs before you dive into the deployment. So I think our DHCP is installed. So we need more. Next, we need to configure the DHCP server. We'll go to next and use the following admin credentials. We're going to use the xlab administrator and commit. DHCP manager. We have to go and check it up and then start it up. So it's already started and we have the IP version 4. So what we want to do now is actually to create a scope, and the scope will be like the range of addresses that when clients connect to a network, there will be assigned an address from that block. And for that, we would have to do a little bit of planning. So let me pull up let's plan the scope right now. That's gonna be command ipconfig /all. Okay, that's our network configuration. And where is my notepad? This is my notepad. Okay, so now let's plan our scope for the DHCP server. Uh, our default gateway is 172.23.192.1. Our DNS server, which is the same server we're using, is gonna be 172.23.191.912.50. So we want to assign IP addresses from 172.23.192 from 100 to 172.23.192.200, just to ensure everything doesn't overlap. So these are the addresses that will be dynamically assigned to workstations that join the network. And I'm gonna reserve the 50 to 100, like we're gonna reserve the IP addresses from 172. Let me just copy that. To 172.49. So this is technically how I usually plan my network. So this is gonna be for internal servers. It's gonna be for any server or service that I want to run on my network. And then I would have other the other part from 49 to 99 as a reserved. And with this, we can technically have 100. We can technically deploy 100 hosts with this setup. Although we can increase it, we could have more. We could use other blocks and increase it. We could have up to 1,000 hosts. But for this setup, we're planning to deploy 100 computers. Okay. That being said, let's go back now and set up our host at a scope. So right click here and say add new scope. Next, the name of our scope is gonna be defaults. Let's call it default scope. And our first IP address here is gonna be, let me see, I doubt if this is gonna work. 72, 23, 192, 100, 172, 23, 192, 200, and our subnet max has a length of 20. That's how I'll have 240 here. Next, add exclusions and delete. So if there's a range of IPs that we don't want to use, we don't want to be assigned, we could use that. But since our range is out of, if we wanted to assign a range, say from 1 to 200, and then we wanted to exclude this range for our servers that we want to assign or something else with it, we could specify the range that we want to exclude. Yeah, we could add multiple range, maybe from say from 2 to 40, and then from 59 to 50. So we would have multiple range for exclude here. But since our scope does not interfere with this, we'll just leave it like that. Next, and you want to put the least duration. That is, this is like how long when a computer is being assigned a dynamic IP, like how long do they have the lease for that IP? So usually you don't want to set this too long. Depending, it just depends on how your network is set up, like how users use it. So there are a whole lot of things that you have to consider, like every value that you put in when you're doing configuration will have to depend on the scenario of the organization and how the user's needs match with what you're trying to set up. So in this case, I would use 1 day. Oh yeah. So I will let the lease of my computers be in 1 day. Next, you want to configure this option now, yes. And the router gateway. So where is it? We had our gateway here, which is this 172.23.192.1. Well, normally you don't want to expose this IP, although they're all private IP addresses, but for some security reasons, because this is more like a test environment, you see this. But after this lab, I would technically change it. So uh, don't be surprised in subsequent series you find different numbers. I'll explain all of this when we get to a security series. X labs and this is a DNS. Yeah, DNS is already set up, and our DNS, just to check, our DNS was this 50. Yeah, and the Win server, you don't have to bother about that. Yes, activate the scope now, finish. So our scope is now active. Any computer that joins this network will be dynamically assigned this IP addresses, and check the address pool. Do we have no lease? Yes. If there were like reservations, we want to create reservations, we want to set specific IP addresses and reserve it for a specific system, we could define that here, but that is not. And here, this is the router IP, the domain name service, and that is our domain. If there's another thing that we want to add to a scope option, we will define it here. And now, once you see this light here, the green checkbox, it means our DHCP server is up and running. And if it's not, then we'll have to start it like how we usually do that. We come here, you come to all tasks, and then you start. But it's already running, so we don't need to start it right now. So our DHCP server is now configured. So we're gonna head over to our DHCP install, manage, to our WDS installation right now. Next, install role-based server selected. The server we want to add is Windows Deployment Service. Next, 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 install. Okay, feature installed successfully. Close. And now I want to head over to set up our WDS. Need to check the notification, add role, feature, add role, everything, nothing is wrong. So we'll come to the management console. This Microsoft console snaps in W. Then open up the server. You see there's an amber sign here, which means it's not yet configured. So we need to right click and say configure server and then follow the wizard. It says integrated with Active Directory. Yes. And the remote installation folder. I'm going to call this WDS remote install. I will put it at C. Normally, we could have a separate network drive where we can save all of this, but just for this initial setup, we will do all of this again. But just for this initial setup, I'm just gonna walk you through, just give you a demo of everything, how it functions before we start breaking up the parts bit by bit and explaining everything. Or even the WDS store, next. Okay, that's just exactly what I was explaining, that normally I would have to do this on a separate volume. And but for this exercise, for this lab, we'll leave it as it is right now, and I'll show you later on how to do create deployment shares and all the rest. So do not listen on DHCP on port 6, configure digital port DSP. Yeah. Next. Do not respond to any next. And finish. And now our WS server is ready. And this is where we're going to save the installation images that you could install from Java network. And this is where we're going to have the boot images, the various boot images. I'll show you all of that later on. And if there are like any drivers, this is where we're going to save the drivers. And since it's already installed, we could go check properties, just make sure do not respond to any IT directory, same directory as Windows. Your boot requires, when you want to boot, you press F12. You could change all those options here. If you always want to boot with Pixie boot, you can still change that here, and a whole lot of settings. So we're gonna right click, go to view all tags, and then we start this server. Now you see the little green plus sign there. It means our WDT server is also running. Okay, so we had to install, where's my Microsoft Notes? Let me just copy this over to our server. Okay, so prepare for deployment. What have we done? We've set up our network, we've installed our server, we've installed our domain controller, we haven't installed MDT yet, network requirement, we've created a domain, we haven't set up our organizational structure, I'll come to that. We've installed ADK, and yeah, we've installed an initialized WDS, Windows Server update services. This is optional. Yeah, okay. Let's skip that for now. And now we have to install MDT. Well, let's install the Windows Update Server first. Services, Windows Server Update Service. Add feature. Next. Okay, so we're gonna go and create another file. So create this new, call it Windows Updates Service. So, it's looking for a path. So we're gonna call this, how am I gonna call this? We're gonna call this Windows Server Update Service. Share. I'll name this C hyphen, how do you call that directory again? Or sometimes you could just do that and then copy this path. There you go. Next. Next. Yeah. Web server. Order default. And then install. We have to wait for it. So while we're waiting, let's go back to some studies. Deploy using that, so using MDT, Microsoft Deployment Toolkit Introduction. And there are several on-premises methods that have been traditionally used to facilitate OS deployments. So I put that somewhere that I can view. Okay, so there are several on-premise methods that have been traditionally used to facilitate OS deployments within organization. While your cloud-based solutions have frequently simplified many methods and processes, on-premises tools still have a place in modern management. In this model, we'll discuss their shifts from traditional to modern management and where on-premise solution best fits into these enterprises. So like I said earlier, although the new methods have, you know, revolutionize the way deployment is being done today, but those traditional methods are still being used, and they are especially applicable where on-premises solutions are still being used in enterprises. And after completing this model, you'll be able to describe the fundamentals of using images in traditional deployment methods, to describe the key benefits, limitation, and decision when planning a deployment of Windows using Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and also describe how Configuration Manager builds upon MDT and how both can work in harmony. And we'll go into that. So next, evaluate traditional deployment methods. So in this section, you're gonna learn how to evaluate the traditional deployment methods to see how they meet your scenario. I think our installation is complete. Let's go close. And we now have launched the post installation task for WSUS. Okay, it's configuring. Okay, so I think we have WES also configured and running properly. Go to its management pane. This configuration wizard. The first things you should do before you start using this is the server firewall configuration to allow clients to access the server. Can this computer connect upstream such as Microsoft? Do you have yes? Next, next, next. No proxy. Next. To configure Windows Server service on the following screen, you need to apply the upstream servers and proxy server settings and information about them. The information to be downloaded include start connection. This process might take several minutes or longer depending on your connection speed. Okay, let's hope it's not gonna take so long. So while that is setting up, let's go back to our discussion. Okay, so default and custom image. So the thing about the previous deployment methods is that they rely on using images. So for example, if we're using MDT, we're going to create what we call a reference image, and that image is what we're going to use to apply to most of our devices. And how we create that reference image, we're going to use a bunch of different tools like Windows System Image Manager. We're going to use like the configuration manager and stuff like that. We're going to work on the answer files, like to change things. We could actually go into the custom. We could customize the image in such a way that we could, even deploy. We could put in a logo. We could rebrand it and do lots and lots of stuff like that. Not necessarily rebranding, but make it look more of like a specific image that is being used for all devices for a company. And we could configure the images in such a way that we input like all the datas, like every information that a user may need to put in when installing, such that when you're running the image, it automatically configures the computer and gets it ready for user to use for that company. And there are lots of tools that we're going to talk about when we're doing image customization. And that file The Windows image that I'm talking about is called install. This comes default with the ISO that you have on your Windows installation media, and the configuration application can be including custom images. Tools such as deployment. There is also DSIM, Deployment Image Service and Manager. You could use that, to service and prepare Windows images. And this is more of like a command line tool, but it's very powerful. Like when you want to use, you could capture a reference image and the settings, and take that image and install it to another computer. There's also sysprep, which is generally used prior to deployment. We're going to use all of those when we're deploying with MDT, and I'm going to show you how. So, for example, we use sysprep before deploying a Windows image to a new PC. We must first generalize the image. The process will remove stuff like sysprep will remove stuff like computer-specific information such as like drivers, security identifiers, and just generally make the image ready for deployments. There is also the concept of scene versus stick images. When you're choosing how to image, scene and scene images refers to what the image contains beyond the OS. So scene image will be looked as the default image or a custom image that just has only the OS and maybe the few drivers that are required to ensure that the operating system is being installed on the device. And a tick image will come pre-installed with applications, maybe like you have Word or Firefox or any other thing. So when you deploy that image, it already has those applications. The user doesn't need, it will save the administrator's time that they'll have to do to install the applications that the user will require to use on the computer after installing the operating system. So the tick image comes already installed with all of those applications, so you don't need to install them again after installing the operating system. And now, boot from VHD. Actually, VHD is virtually means a virtual hard disk, which as you see from our VM, we use a virtual hard disk, and you could systematically create a VHD that you could use in the case of like virtual machines or maybe like in the cloud. So in that case, when you create a VM, instead of putting like from an installation media from an ISO, you just put the computer directly from a Windows 7 or Windows 10 that is being already installed in a virtual hard disk drive. So set up the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit for deployment. And essentially, this is what we're doing right now. We're setting everything all up for deployment. And what is MDT? What is Microsoft Deployment Toolkit? It is a unified collection of tools, processes, and guidance for automating desktop and server deployment. You can create it. You can use it to create reference images or as a complete deployment solution. MDT is one of the most important tools that is available to IT professionals today, and it's important that I show you how to use it because it is important. It's one of the most important tools. If you've used Windows Deployment Service, then you could do everything that you could do with WDS, with MDT, plus more. And in addition to reduce the deployment time and standardizing desktop and server images, MDT enables you to manage security and ongoing configurations more easily. MDT builds on top of the core deployment tools like Windows Assessment and Deployment Kit. So like I initially showed you, we have already installed ADK on our server, and it supports the deployment of Windows 10 or later. So you could only use MDT to deploy Windows 10 or later. If you want to deploy Windows 7, no, actually, yeah, Windows 10 later. So if you want to deploy Windows 11, you have to do a hack to actually enable that with WDS or MDT. Or if you want to deploy Windows 11, then you would use the modding technologies like Autopilot and Intune, which we'll also look in this series because I'm going to show you all the methods that we use to deploy Windows clients. And it provides zero-touch installations when working with the configuration manager. Entity has been heavily used by IT over the years to help with the deployment of Windows 7 and Windows 10. Entity is often used as the base to create clean corporate images and has the flexibility to act independently or to integrate with configuration manager. By integrating MDT with configuration manager, MDT can expand the default capabilities and open more options for deployment consideration. So in order for us to set up MDT, before we did that, we had to set up the active domain, which we already did. We have to use Windows 2016 or later server. We're using Windows 2016, which is good. One of the reasons why we prefer using the old servers is based on compatibility, because when with new server technologies like Win Server 2022, those hasn't been used yet, so it hasn't been tested enough. So you're not really confident. But with an old technology, they're all the same. They offer the same services, although a little they change things from bit by bit. You may see the interface, like the graphical user interface, may be a bit different, but then the underlying systems still remain the same, especially if you're using the teen Windows, the teen server that just gives you only the command prompt. You come to realize a bunch of those things, they still remain the same. But we prefer to use, a much later version due to compatibility issues. And then we'll have to install Windows 80K, which we've already done. And we'll install Windows Deployment Service, which we've already done. This will facilitate the network-driven initialization of the OS deployment. So we'll use, if we have to install, if we have, after creating the image, if it comes to the fact that we have to deploy those images over a network, maybe we have just a small network, this would also work well. We'll use WTS to do that. And also the Windows Server Update Service, which is what we're currently installing right now. And how this work is some kind of a connection that MDT is going to use to deliver updates during the OS deployment process. So, like after you've installed the Windows client, sometimes you may have to run the updates before you continue anything. Yeah, this server takes care of all of that. And once all of this is set up, we're gonna explore MDT. Exploring MDT, MDT offers numerous tools to help you plan and deploy Windows, and regardless of the size of the enterprise or the components remains the same. Some of the key features and components that are available when planning a Windows deployment setup includes Windows 10 or later client support, Windows Server 2016 or support the ability to automate a sequence of tasks. So there's a task sequence that we'll create, which is based like all the various tasks that you use when you're installing your Windows client. We are going to configure all of those, so MDT is going to handle all of those for us. And also maybe the task sequence will be something like when it gets to a point where you have to install this software. And why it's important to use a task sequence is because you may want to install a software that depends on certain libraries. Say, for example, we want to install Office 365. It may need the .NET framework libraries and stuff like that. So we create a tag sequence in such a way that before we install, so for example, let's say before we install, it will be something like before we install Office 365, first of all, install .NET framework. So our tag sequence will be something like first you say install .NET framework, next install Office 365, next uh, set the time zone, and a bunch of tags that usually occur during the installation process. We're going to create a sequence for all of that, because that way it ensures that before one thing runs, you have to ensure that most of the dependencies are already available in the system. If not so, it's going to error out and then our deployment is going to fail, which is not what we want. And the other part, deployment interface, deployment of a user empowerment interface that enables you to customize their windows. You could have an interface where users can customize their Windows installation, and then we could also display the status of the currently running deployment, or we can, turn off everything so there's nothing there. And we could offline pit loading, which saves hours of encryption time by having pit loader enabled during Windows pre-installation. We could enable BitLocker during the installation process, and support running of user migration states tools. Like, so if, for example, if we want to move a user from one device to the next, and well, it's a new device that we want to move them to, we can, capture their configurations, settings, and their user information, the personal information that they had on their computer, and use user migration tool to capture those information and add them to our deployment using MDT. Okay, so exploring the components, we're not there yet, and once we're done with all the setup, then we're gonna continue with the component. But as we're saying, this is the deployment workbench for MDT. I don't know if I could, if I can, okay, you can see it. So as you can see, this is the deployment share. We want to create a deployment share, and then that's where we apply the image, the applications that we want to install. We're going to save them in this shared operating system that we want, and then we're going to create a tag sequence. And when we actually boot the computer using MDT, using the custom boot image that we'll create, it's gonna prompt us to select the deployment share that we want to use. So the boot images are WinP images that will start the deployment. Let's see if we have, yeah, we're gonna have boot images. I'll show you all of that. And these images will start in a folder. We copy them and then we use them to start the new computer that we want to deploy using MDT. And the OS images are technically going to be the images, the golden images that we're going to create, the reference images that we're going to use for our deployment. And we also have applications, we also have drivers, similar to like what I was showing you in WTS, and packages, and then the tag sequence that I just talked about recently. And yeah, and that's technically manage and deploy images using Microsoft Deployment 2. So all of this will be explained when we have our lab set up. So why that is running, what else can we look at about preparing? let's go back to this document and just have a checklist of all what we've done. So we've created our domain controller, we have a DHCP server running, we have DNS server running, we've actually created our domain name. In this case, it says contoso.com, but I use xlabs. And it says we should have got 200. I did 128, which is fairly useful. If for the next episode we'll create a much bigger share if we need it. We can always add another extra hard drive to our virtual machine. And we'll have several client computers. We'll create these client computers as we move along. And the storage requirements 200, so should have the ability to store up to 200 gigabytes on a data drive T if you have a computer with a single version C. Okay, so here we have to create a partition, but for now we'll use the same one. If you don't have Hyper-V, you have Hyper-V network requirements, domain credentials. This is the domain name you need to create. So I'll create some notes. Okay, and so we need let's see MDT server, and it's gonna have the various use Windows Server 2016. It's gonna have gonna run Active Directory domain service. It's gonna run domain name service. It's gonna run DHCP. It's gonna run WSUS. It's gonna run ATK, and it's gonna run MDT. Okay, and this is gonna be our primary domain controller, and also a server that's gonna host all these services. And then we're gonna need one Hyper-V, just a blank Hyper-V VM, probably with this server is gonna have 200 gigabytes disk space, and two partitions. So we can split the partitions. The first one is going to be 60 gigabytes, and the other file share we can do that for 140 gigabyte. This is going to be we're gonna recreate all of this in the next episode. And what else do we need? We need Windows 10 installation media that can be downloaded from I'm gonna get the link for that. Windows installation media, you could that can be downloaded from that. And what else do we need? We're gonna need one Hyper-V VM. Probably we use generation 1 Gen 1 Hyper-V with 1 gigabyte of RAM and say 60 gigabyte disk space. Okay, that is still installing. It's still connecting. Wow, because that's gonna take it's gonna take several minutes according. Okay, that looks like it's gonna take a while. Okay, so while that is still running and hoping that it goes, let's keep on doing some planning. We only have 2 hours and our time is almost up for this episode. So what else can we do? Yeah, so it keep on running. For the client computers, we gonna create VMs as we go for that. And storage requirements. So this we've already decided that. So it's gonna be C, 60 gigabytes, and this is gonna be T, H3 drive, which is gonna be 40 gigabytes. So we're gonna have two disks on our MDT on our master server. And the network and our domain name is gonna be xlabs.local. And for organizational unit, we're gonna create an organizational unit. So technically, what we will need for xlabs, we're gonna need accounts, and for now we're just gonna need accounts. We're gonna have two types of accounts, and we're gonna need a service account. The service account is gonna be the account where it's gonna be something like it's gonna be more it's not a user account, it's gonna be a service account that MDT is gonna use to access the shares and the other resources and other services, and it's gonna have setting privileges. We'll get to that when we start setting up that. So first step, one, we're gonna install our Windows server. So this is all what we've done today. We've installed Windows Server 2016 server, and two, we have install and configure Active Directory, and three, we've installed and configure DHCP, and four, we've also configured install and configure DHCP DNS and DHCP, and we've also 4 installed Windows ADK, and 5, we've installed Windows deployment service. And now we are installing Windows Server Update service. Okay, I think ADK will say let me store it just here. Okay, ah, kind of a lot. We've already done a lot. And now install Windows ADK. Okay, so why this is going on, I'm just wondering if I could run MDT. Yeah, I don't think that will interfere. Yeah, I have to install MDT. So let's go back to our browser and we're gonna search for MDT. Yeah, I think, yeah, bad gateway. Hmm. Where's the link? Install MDT. Visit the MDT resource page. Okay, yeah, download MDT. And the one person deployment, this should be the latest version. System requirements, supports Windows Server 2016, Windows 10. Installation instruction from the link, download that, run the MSI, accept the license, follow, start deployment workbench, and we're gonna download that. So the version that we're looking for is the x64.msi. Once it is downloaded, we'll go to our download folder and run the MDT setup. Run. Next. Accept. Next. 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 And install. This won't take a lot of time. And finish. And 7 of install MDT. Okay, and that should be all about MDT. It's just a simple application, and I'm gonna show you now where everything is. So for our Windows deployment kit, everything should be here. We have the deployment and image tool, environment. We have Windows image and configuration designer. We have Windows system image manager, Windows SIM, which this is what we're gonna use with MDT to customize our image. And then we have here the Microsoft deployment toolkit, which is why is it not dropping? Oh, I guess it's still installing. This is our deployment workbench. So here we are in MDT, the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, proprietary unified. So technically, we have the Information Center, which is essentially documentation. You can get, planning MDT deployments. You get further information, all what you want to do, and then we have our deployment share. So the next thing we have to do is actually to prepare our deployment share. Let's go back to the notes. Prepare for deployment. Okay, so that we're done. I installed ADK. We're gonna create our organizational unit later. So let's go to, oh, okay. Okay, I'm gonna stop this connection. because we only have just a couple of minutes left. Okay. Okay, so let's go back to Active Directory Users and Management Console. We're gonna come here and we want to just create a new organizational unit called new organizational unit. We're gonna call this X Labs. Okay, why I created a new organization, Microsoft comes with a whole bunch of defaults, and I always don't like to touch those default ones. So I just prefer to leave everything in the default folder. And if I'm adding anything to the system, I use that. And also it helps in security because if an attacker is actually performing an attack on your Active Directory domain, they already have that structure. They already know where, they know you're going to save user accounts here and stuff like that. But when it's a little bit different, then it saves you a bunch of time. So yeah, I'm gonna create another organizational unit called accounts. Protect the container from accidental delete, yes. And inside this, I'm gonna add another organizational unit called service accounts. Let me just see. I think I wrote that somewhere. Yeah, service accounts. So we're gonna create a different kind. This is not a user per se user account. It's a service account that is gonna be used by device. So I'm gonna say organization. Cancel. Call this service accounts. And inside this now, I'm gonna create a new user, and this is gonna be our service user. I think there should be a name that Microsoft will recommend. Everything here, you could do all of this with PowerShell scripting, but then I want to do it this way so you see how it is done. So this is the part where you're gonna create a new user. Just trying to look at the we could run the scripts, then copy the following command if I save it or set up that script. Okay, yeah, this is the active domain way. So in that you're gonna create the account. We already create the service account, and then now we're gonna create the MDT user. So you could actually run this with PowerShell script, or we could manually do this. We could actually do this with from the panel. So we go to Active Directory, we open Active Directory users and computers, and for the added organization, I use it accounts. We're gonna say new account, new user, and we're gonna name this MDT BA. The username is gonna be MDT BA. Password never expires, and we're gonna use our secret password. So what this command says, new add user, the username is added a name there, user principal name, that's a logon name, and the path is going to be AU accounts, service accounts, under accounts, and your domain and so. I'm going to give it a description. It's going to be the MDT build accounts. Let's finish. We can see, come back, go to properties. I just want to add that description so I see that from a distance that is the MDT build account. See what else do we have to add for the add the password. Plain false, chase password without logging, no. Password never expires, no. Okay, so what that means is I'm gonna go back to accounts. Password never expires, true. Change password without logging, no. Enable, true. Open the property again, unlock account, is the account profile, organization path, member, yeah, okay. So we have created an account, and then next thing we're going to do is to create and share the log folder. So we're going to go now to our directory. That's right here. Select on C, and all these folders would have been in that the drive that I said we'll create, but for this we're just going to leave it now like that. So create a new folder and call it logs. Logs, and there's a command that we have to run. So let's read the command and then do everything manually. So it's going to say new item that path t item directory, and the new SMB share, the name is going to be logs, the path is going to be t, it's going to be c logs. Change access to everyone, ICAS log grant, MDA OIC organizational unit. Okay, so it's going to change access from everyone, and that I'm just going to run this PowerShell script. So before I run that script, we want to do a little bit of modifications to it. Let me just teach you that. So instead of saying that, we change this to C, item directory SMMP, log name, change this log again to C, and change access everyone DC, and then we're going to copy the script, open up PowerShell, and run it from there. Run as administrator, right click, that is it, and now enter. Process successful. 1.5, an item in the specified path C logs already exists. Okay, that's because I created the directory physically. So I can just go delete this, and then we run the command again. Hmm, what happened? Okay, where did I copy that? Okay, SMB share name logs, sign access, change everyone. SMB log cannot find the file specified. Okay, anyway, so let's do this manually. I'll show you how to do that manually. So go here, right click, you see share to specific people, and it's saying that it's shared to. mdt check name, add mdt, and add everyone, give everyone read access, and then we give mdt read and write access and share. Okay, and then we move on. So essentially it's gonna look like this. Oh, I see. I get where we're getting the errors. Okay, so we're having a different computer name. So if I come here and I say, who am I? It's xlabs slash administrator. And the name of the server is deploy server. So in my little script here, I think I have to change something here. I'm just trying to figure out. New item path C login. Okay, so that is set up, and if I can go to the folder, you want to check, go to properties and open up share, deploy share logs, share advanced, and you see that it's now shared. And what else do we have to do before we route up for today? Use support center one trace to read log files optional. Uh, yeah, okay. So everything being set, I think our server is set up, and I'm just gonna let the WDS run, and in the next episode, we are going to view how to create a reference image. So this is gonna be what we'll be looking at in our next episode, how to create a reference image and ensure and test that everything is working properly. So for now, our server is up and running, and I believe everything is ready to start preparing for deployment. Save. Clean up OMS, server manager. Okay, so today we have installed Windows 2016 server. We installed Active Directory. We set up Active Directory, we gave a domain. We created a service account in our Active Directory that we're going to use for deployment. We installed and configured GCP. We also installed and configured WDS, and we installed WSUS. So just gonna open up this and then we gonna connect back to that our server. Okay, that's it for today, and I'll catch you in the next one.